Project that I'll be presenting in this channel, it's a secondary project. There is a primary project, but I won't be elaborating on that primary project, at least not at the moment. I'll be referring to it as I'm giving the details on the secondary project. But the secondary project, I call it the philosophical system of practicality, and the function of the project, or the function of the system, is that you have a goal and you follow the system and you'll be able to achieve the goal. Now it sounds simple in principle, like you can just think my goal is to touch the wall, so I just reach out my hand and I touch the wall, right? But there's a lot of stuff that happens in between me having the desire and achieving the goal. A lot of stuff that happens in between that is taken for granted, and because it's taken for granted, sometimes we have a goal and we can't achieve it. So some of the goals that I have for this system is that it must be comprehensive, and it must be transferable. It must be applicable in all situations, and it must be duplicable in a way that everybody can learn it. Now, one of the directives of the project is that I want it to be original. In fact, as I was developing my primary project, I would do no reading, and I would stay away from extra sources, from researching other sources. It was only until I completed the primary project that I started reading and looking at other sources. And originality is so important to me that I do read some books here and there, but I only read them not to discover things, but to confirm things that I have already discovered on my own. One of the reasons why originality is very important to me is because I want this system to be derivable from existence. I want it to be essential to existence, so that anybody could have derived it. Anybody could have discovered it on their own. Like if you were stranded in an island with nobody to talk to you, with no information, with no internet, you would be able to come up with the system as well. So there really is no excuse. The only thing that you need to be able to discover the system and to be able to apply the system is yourself, and whatever yourself includes. You don't need any other stuff. You don't need any other sources. You don't need any secret knowledge. It's all on you. So that's one of the reasons why originality is very important. You don't need any information from anybody else. You don't need any beliefs from any system of beliefs or any institutionalized belief system. All you need is yourself and basically existence, and whatever access you have from being alive itself. The second reason why originality is very important to me is because it's just my own philosophy of learning. And the way I think is that you can't say that you have learned something completely until you are able to come up with the same thing yourself, until you are able to see how you would have derived that same lesson on your own. If somebody tells you something and you don't reflect on it enough for you to have come up with it on your own, then you're just taking their information for granted, right? You're believing it, but you're taking the lesson for granted. You're taking the background you're taking its foundation for granted. So that's why, if you can believe what they say, but you don't really understand it until you understand how they came to that conclusion. And that's just my own philosophy of learning. And basically, one more thing I want to say about originality is that, there's a lot of books you can read, and there's a lot of information you can get from people. But you always have to think about, where did those people learn what they know? Where did they get those lessons? And sometimes they get it from somewhere else. Sometimes they do research from other people, right? And those people, where did they learn it from? And you go back and you find out that they learned it from other people, and then you kind of have to trace back to see how far back the lesson goes. And you have to, and sometimes you have to, if you pay attention to the very first person who learned that lesson, you have to realize, where did they get that lesson from, right? And basically, the original point, the point where the first person got that lesson, where they came up with that idea, is just nature itself. They were doing some observation and they observed something or they thought of something, but where did that thought come from? It came from stuff around them, from something that influenced them. And unless it came from, you know, something, some mysterious word of heaven or some mysterious dimension where other things exist. Other than things like that, everything that everybody knows came from some observation they made from existence. So everything I'm presenting is not any secret information, is not anything transdimensional. It's just observations that I made from experience, from you know, just from experience and from things that happened. And it's just connections I've made, conclusions that I've made over the stuff that I've observed. Now at this point the project is in its developmental stages, and the videos that I make are addressing that. So you have to keep that in mind. The project is not complete, the system of practicality is not complete, and so there's a couple of things that causes that are implied because of that. The experiences, the research that I make is not through reading, as I've already said. It's more through experiences, experiments, real life experiments that I make with real people, and I gather data. I make observations and I gather the data, and then I make a conclusion out of it. First, I have to mention that what matters in these experiments is not the actual events. The relevant part is not the actual events that are involved the real people, is not the experiments, but the principle that is extracted, the analysis, and the dynamics that I extract from these events. But if sometimes the event is very relevant, and so I'll describe that, but I will change names, or I won't mention names at all, for the sake of privacy. And sometimes I won't post up videos because the event is too recent and I don't want to give too many hints. One of the reasons why I hesitated to make these videos is because if people know that I'm experimenting, they may react differently. You know, it won't be a blind experiment anymore. They'll know to expect something out of the ordinary, or in their mind they'll be thinking, and that'll affect the results of the experiment. The second thing that is implied by the system being in its developmental stages is that the language, the terms that I use are not precise. Sometimes they are unfit to describe what I'm actually doing, and sometimes they overlap with other concepts that I'm developing, that I'm using. Sometimes I'll use the same term for two different concepts, and that can be confusing at times. Again, the system is in its developmental stages, so it doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is for me to understand, because I'm the one developing it. Once it's complete, and once I'm ready to teach the system to other people, then I'll focus more on the things I need to do in order to communicate it efficiently, and then I'll focus more on using strict terms and clear words for it. But for now, I'm just, the notes that I'm taking are just for myself, and as I'm reflecting, as I'm making videos, you'll see that it's mostly just for me. Because for now, my focus is not really the terms, it's not really the language I use, since I'm the only one that needs to understand it. The only thing that I'm focusing on is for me to be able to grasp the concepts, the dynamics, and the connections between the different concepts, the influence that one concept, one idea has over another. So the language will be very ambiguous at times. So with that said, I just want to point out that things are not definite, and they're definitely incomplete, and that's because my aim is not really to convey anything certain right now. So it will seem ambiguous, and most of the time you will probably not understand, and that's just fine, because I do not expect you to understand, because I'm not really making an effort for anybody to understand yet. But I would expect you, if there's any value that you can get from these videos, I would expect you to grasp an idea of what the project is about, and maybe grasp some things some concepts that are of value to you. And you will definitely see the effect of that because I'm not trying to convince you, because I'm not trying to convey any certain message. There will be things that you don't understand, and there will definitely be things that you don't agree with. And that's just fine. And so one of the things that I want to point out is that me in my personality, I am not competitive at all, and I really I don't like to argue. So that doesn't mean that I won't listen. I don't like to argue. I do listen, but when I sense that a person is just arguing for the sake of arguing, they're not really trying to understand, I'll just back off and let them win the floor. You know, I'll let them have the spotlight. And the reason is because, you know, I think that a good debate should be both sides listening one more to the other, each side more than they're talking. You know, we have two ears and you have one mouth. So that's just kind of my philosophy on debate and on listening. A lot of the times what goes on in arguments is that what you say is more important than what you hear. I'm the other way around. What you hear is more important than what you say. And so when somebody's saying something, I'll listen, and if I have a different idea, I'll respond. But if I sense that the other person is not listening, then I'll just back off and I'll let them win the argument. But if I sense that they're curious and that they're actually trying to learn, then I'll find different ways to be able to convey the message, or to be able to show them in what ways I'm open for them to convince me. So as far as questions and answers, you can't ask questions, and if I feel like it's appropriate for the purpose of this channel to elaborate on those questions, then I'll probably make a video if I feel like it's convenient for me as well. But if I feel like a question might as well be ignored, then you know, I'll just put it off and, you know, maybe address it in another time when it is more convenient. One of the things that I want to point out, one of the things that I live by and that I think that everybody should live by is something called the principle of charity. Now, the principle of charity is a philosophical principle, and what it's trying to say is that when you're arguing with somebody, when you're listening to somebody, is that one should assume that that person is in the right state of mind, you know, they're not crazy, and that whatever they have to say is actually reasonable. And when you assume that, you will actually try to understand what this person is trying to say. You'll actually try to understand the message instead of just deeming them crazy and dismissing them. Because once you dismiss them, once you deem them crazy, then you're not listening anymore, and your focus is just is not to learn anymore, but your focus is just to teach them and to change them and to tell them that they're wrong. You know? And so, but if you want to learn something, if you want to gain more knowledge, if you want to increase your perception, if you want to be more thorough in your perception of the world and your perception of other ideas and other people's ideas, you should assume that the person is reasonable, that the person is telling the truth, and that what the person has to say has value. So that's something that I live by. That's something that when I talk to somebody, of course there are times when I get frustrated and I just don't listen. Everybody has those times, but it's just something that you should try and practice when you're listening to others, to try and listen to them in a very sincere manner. And so, especially because of the way that I'm presenting this project at this stage, I do recognize that for you to get some value out of it, you'll need a lot of charity for the things that I'm saying, especially because I'm not explaining anything. But if you have charity, if you assume that what I'm trying to say is actually something reasonable and of value, then your mind will find more ways in which what I say makes sense. Of course, because I'm not explaining, you might reach wrong conclusions, or conclusions that are not in mind. But if you reach something reasonable, whatever it is, whether it's what I'm trying to say or not, if you just assume that what another person is trying to say, your mind will make sense of it, and that sense, and whatever sense that makes, it will be valuable to you. So I hope you learned a lot, and I'm excited for the development of this project, and I'll see you soon.